It always starts with a smile, does it not? A gentle word, a kind gesture, a quiet willingness to listen when others talk, even when they never ask you how you feel. At some point in your life, someone may have told you that being nice is the key to being loved, respected, and safe. That if you are good to others, they will be good to you. That kindness is your shield against cruelty. But what if that idea is wrong? What if, instead of protection, your kindness has marked you for something far more dangerous? Imagine this. You enter a room full of strangers. You are polite, warm, and helpful. You offer your seat to someone tired. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You offer to help when no one asks. But as the days pass, something begins to shift. People start expecting you to agree. They talk over you. They ask for favors, then disappear. They laugh at your discomfort. And when you finally say no, they look at you with confusion, as if kindness was all you were allowed to be. Why is it that being nice, over time, seems to strip you of something essential? Why does it so often lead to feeling used, unseen, and exhausted? You might think it is just bad luck, or maybe you were too generous with the wrong people. But the truth is more disturbing. It is not random, it is psychological, and it happens more often than you want to admit. In the world of dark psychology, being nice is not just a personality trait, it is a signal. It tells certain people that you can be manipulated, pushed, or controlled. While you see yourself as considerate and thoughtful, others see an opening, a crack in your armor they can crawl through. These are the emotional predators, the manipulators, the ones who take your kindness and turn it into a trap. And it works because you let it, not by choice, not consciously, but through deep and invisible conditioning. You are trained to think that conflict is wrong, that standing up for yourself is selfish, that making someone else uncomfortable makes you a bad person. These beliefs are not yours alone. They have been fed into you since childhood, through school, family, and culture. They are survival tools for fitting in, but in the hands of someone with no conscience, they become your weakness. Let us be clear, being nice is not the enemy, but when it becomes your identity, your protection, your currency for belonging, it can turn into a silent surrender, a slow erasure of self. You become a person who never says no, who avoids confrontation at all costs, who lives in quiet resentment, but smiles through the pain. And the worst part is, the people around you will not stop. Why would they? You have taught them that you will take it, that you will always say yes. There is a chilling reality here, one that most people never want to face. The ones who seem the kindest are often the ones carrying the heaviest burden, because when you make being nice your only armor, you do not protect yourself, you expose yourself. Now ask yourself this: how many times have you said yes when you meant no? How many times have you kept silent just to keep the peace? How many times have you felt used but blamed yourself for not being strong enough? You see, there is something deeper beneath the surface of this behavior. It is not about being polite. It is not about being a good person. It is about survival, about fear, about a subtle and dangerous illusion that tells you, if you are nice enough, the world will not hurt you. But what if that belief is not only wrong, but harmful? What if the very act of being nice, when done unconsciously, is the reason why some people become targets? There is a darker secret here, rooted in psychology and human behavior. It is not taught in school. It is not mentioned in polite conversation, but it is there, hiding in plain sight, shaping your relationships and silently defining your boundaries. Stay with me, because once you see it, you will never unsee it. You have been told your whole life that being nice is the right thing to do. From your earliest memories, you were rewarded for politeness, praised for obedience, and encouraged to be agreeable. You were taught that kindness brings kindness, that compassion brings peace, and that those who give will always be loved in return. This belief has shaped your choices, your relationships, and your self-worth. It has quietly become the lens through which you view your role in the world. But what if that belief is not true? What if the promise was never real? What if being nice has never been a guarantee of safety, or affection, or protection. In fact, what if it is the very reason some people suffer in silence, trapped in patterns of emotional pain and psychological manipulation? This false belief is not innocent. It is dangerous, because it blinds you to the truth about human behavior. Not everyone values kindness. Not everyone responds to softness with softness. In the realm of dark psychology, niceness can be interpreted as weakness. It can be seen as submission. It can invite exploitation. Psychological studies have revealed unsettling insights into this dynamic. In controlled experiments, individuals who displayed high agreeableness were more likely to be chosen as targets for tasks involving blame, manipulation, or emotional labor. They were viewed as less likely to resist, less likely to say no, and more likely to absorb discomfort for the sake of group harmony. In other words, being nice made them more vulnerable. This is not about morality. It is about perception. When you are always available, always accommodating, always willing to absorb tension without complaint, others begin to believe that you exist to make their lives easier. You become a role, not a person. And over time, that role erodes your sense of self. There is a hidden trap in this cycle, because being nice often feels good. It brings temporary approval. It avoids conflict. It gives the illusion of control. You feel like you are keeping things together, like you are maintaining peace. But peace built on self-erasure is not peace. It is quiet suffering. This suffering becomes invisible because you do not complain. You do not push back. You internalize, and in doing so, you reinforce the very behavior that is hurting you. This is the paradox. The more you try to prevent harm by being nice, the more harm you absorb in silence. It is not your fault that you believe this lie. It has been passed down through generations, rooted in family systems, cultural expectations, and social norms. It has been reinforced by schools, workplaces, and even relationships that punish authenticity and reward compliance. But now that you see it, you cannot unsee it. It is time to question the script, not to abandon kindness, but to understand its cost, to see when it is given freely and when it is demanded, to recognize when it is a gift and when it is a survival strategy. This is the beginning of that awareness, and it must be felt before it can be changed. If this reflection resonates with something deep inside you, share it in the comments. Speak what you have never spoken, not to impress, but to release. Like this video, if it is revealing something real. Subscribe, not for entertainment, but for awakening. Because the truth we are about to uncover next will change how you see everyone around you. Human behavior is not as rational or fair as you may wish to believe. Beneath the surface of politeness and social order, there is a primitive structure that governs many of our interactions. In this structure, people are constantly assessing one another, often without conscious awareness, measuring traits such as strength, submission, confidence, and hesitation. These measurements influence how one is treated, remembered, or forgotten. When someone enters a room, speaks gently, avoids confrontation, or quickly offers help, it might appear to be compassionate play, but in the deeper psychology of perception, those signals are sometimes interpreted through a different lens. In environments shaped by power dynamics and unspoken hierarchies, those who appear overly agreeable are often perceived as easier to control. This dynamic is not based on malice in every case. It is a reflection of evolutionary mechanisms. In group survival models, individuals subconsciously rank others according to dominance and submission. Research from the field of social dominance theory has shown that people adjust their behavior based on perceived social roles. Those who appear dominant receive compliance. Those who appear submissive are often burdened with expectations. This is not always intentional, but it is real. Within this framework, being nice when expressed without boundaries or assertiveness may be read as a form of surrender. The more agreeable you appear, the more you may be treated as someone who will not resist. In studies of workplace dynamics, highly agreeable employees were found to be more likely assigned undesirable tasks, more likely to be interrupted during meetings, and less likely to be respected in moments of negotiation. These findings are not outliers, they are patterns. Now consider the role of emotional predators. These individuals do not function by empathy or fairness, they function by exploitation. Whether they are narcissistic, manipulative, or merely opportunistic, they observe kindness, not as a virtue but as an invitation. In psychological profiling, these personalities often score high in traits related to manipulation and control, such as Machiavellianism and psychopathy. Their goal is not to coexist, but to extract. To them, being nice is a soft target. It signals someone who will avoid conflict, someone who will absorb blame, someone who will keep giving, even when it hurts. These predators often do not need to use force. They rely on subtle cues, knowing their target will comply to avoid discomfort. It is a dynamic of control that operates quietly beneath the surface of daily life. This dynamic does not only exist in extreme cases, it manifests in subtle moments. When someone keeps interrupting you and you say nothing, when you are handed a burden and you accept it without question, when someone crosses a line and you forgive it immediately. Each of these moments may feel small, but together they reveal a larger system, one that rewards assertion and punishes softness. It is important to clarify that being kind is not a flaw. The flaw lies in assuming that everyone else is functioning with the same moral compass. In truth, human behavior is varied, complex, and at times deeply predatory. Failing to recognize this does not make you more noble, it makes you more vulnerable. So, the question must be asked: when you are nice, are you truly choosing kindness? Or are you avoiding the discomfort of saying no? Are you giving from strength or from fear? These are not accusations, they are invitations to reflect. The psychology of social roles is not fixed. Awareness creates change, but that awareness must begin with the recognition that being nice, when left unchecked, can place you in the role of prey. And what happens when that role becomes your identity is something far more destructive than you may realize. To understand why certain individuals are drawn to you, not for who you are but for what you offer without resistance, you must begin with the psychological profile of an empath. An empath is someone who feels deeply, who senses the emotions of others often before those emotions are spoken, and who instinctively seeks to heal pain, even if that pain does not belong to them. These are qualities born from sensitivity, often shaped by early emotional experiences, and while they may seem like strengths, they become vulnerabilities in the presence of someone who knows how to twist them. Manipulators, particularly those who fall into the clinical patterns of narcissism, Machiavellianism, or psychopathy, are drawn to the emotional depth of an empath for a specific reason. They do not feel emotional connection in the same way, but they know how to mimic it. They know how to study others, how to mirror needs, how to create illusions of affection or dependence. When they meet someone who is nice, giving, and emotionally responsive, they do not feel gratitude, they feel opportunity. In many documented cases of narcissistic abuse, victims often describe the early stage of the relationship as intense, affirming, and deeply connected. The manipulator showers them with praise, attention, and emotional energy, not because they feel love, but because they are setting the hook. They identify your patterns quickly. You always forgive. You want to believe the best. You blame yourself when things go wrong. And slowly they begin to shift the power dynamic. They withdraw affection to provoke panic. They challenge your memories to create confusion. They escalate demands while lowering appreciation. This process is not accidental. It is calculated. It is reinforced by your own desire to return to the version of the relationship you believed was real. But that version never existed. It was designed for you to lower your guard, to attach, and to begin molding yourself around their approval. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer once spoke about the will to power as a force that exists beneath the surface of human behavior, where relationships are not always mutual, but driven by domination or submission. In the context of dark psychology, this philosophical idea takes on a more disturbing shape. The manipulator seeks power, not through force but through control of your perception. And what better tool than your kindness? What better opening than your fear of hurting others? Your guilt when you say no, your silence when your boundaries are crossed. Over time, your identity begins to shrink. You become more reactive, more anxious, more confused. You explain their behavior to yourself, make excuses for their cruelty, and convince yourself that if you can just be better, things will go back to how they were. But they will not, because for the manipulator, your emotional suffering is not a problem. It is a resource. It is what makes you easier to control. Psychological literature is filled with studies showing how individuals in toxic relationships lose their sense of reality, experience cognitive dissonance, and develop a trauma bond that keeps them attached, even when the relationship becomes emotionally unbearable. The common thread in many of these studies is that the individuals who stayed the longest were the ones who identified as being kind, empathic, and understanding. That is not a coincidence. That is the pattern. You must ask yourself not only why you are giving so much, but who is always taking. The presence of love is not measured by how much you sacrifice. It is measured by how much of yourself you are allowed to keep. And if you are always the one apologizing, always the one forgiving, always the one bending, then perhaps you are not in a relationship at all. You may simply be participating in someone else's strategy for control. The cost of being nice, when it is not protected by self-awareness, is that you attract those who see kindness as weakness. And when those people enter your life, they do not change. They change you. What you become in their presence may be the clearest sign of who they truly are. Guilt is a powerful emotion. It is one of the earliest emotional responses we learn to associate with disobedience, with disappointment, and with deviation from the expectations placed upon us. In a healthy mind, guilt serves as a compass. It helps us reflect on harm we may have caused and motivates us to make things right. But in the context of manipulation, and especially in those who have been conditioned to equate their value with being nice, guilt becomes a weapon turned inward. When your identity is built on being agreeable, on avoiding conflict, and on prioritizing the feelings of others above your own, guilt becomes your constant companion, not because you have done something wrong, but because saying no feels like a betrayal, setting a boundary feels like selfishness, asking for respect feels like aggression. These thoughts are not random. They are the residue of years of subtle conditioning. In many family systems, particularly those with emotionally immature or controlling parents, children are taught, not through explicit instruction, but through emotional consequence, that their needs are secondary. If you spoke up, you were labeled difficult. If you said no, you were made to feel guilty. Over time, this pattern becomes internalized. You begin to believe that peace comes only when you give in, and so you carry that pattern into adulthood, unaware that you are still operating from the survival logic of your childhood. Boundaries are essential for psychological health. They define the limits of what is acceptable, what is fair, and what is emotionally safe. But for someone who is deeply conditioned to associate boundaries with conflict, asserting one feels dangerous. You worry that the other person will be hurt, angry, or disappointed, and because your sense of worth is tied to keeping others happy, you allow your boundaries to erode, slowly, quietly, over time. This erosion does not happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in small, barely noticeable ways. You agree to things you do not want. You stay silent when something feels wrong. You rationalize behavior that makes you uncomfortable. You smile when you feel resentment. You endure it. And in that endurance, you lose clarity. You no longer trust your instincts. You begin to question your own reactions, and eventually you forget what it feels like to feel safe within yourself. Psychologists have identified this process as a form of learned helplessness, where repeated exposure to emotional stress without relief leads to a belief that resistance is useless. It is not that you cannot fight back. It is that your mind has accepted that fighting back only brings more pain. So you adapt. You make yourself smaller. You become agreeable to avoid confrontation. You suffer silently, hoping that your niceness will be enough to maintain some semblance of peace. But peace that comes at the cost of your voice is not peace. It is submission. This silent suffering is one of the most common patterns found in toxic relationships, in dysfunctional workplaces, and in one-sided friendships. The nice person becomes the emotional buffer, the one who always understands, the one who carries the weight of everyone else's needs. And when they finally break, no one understands why, because the signs were invisible. The pain was hidden beneath politeness, beneath a smile that said everything was fine. The truth is, people often do not notice your suffering until it inconveniences them, until your silence turns into withdrawal, until your patience turns into distance. By then, you are already exhausted, not just emotionally, but psychologically, because carrying the emotional burden of others, while denying your own needs, creates a split inside you, a fracture between who you are and who you are allowed to be. This fracture cannot be ignored forever. It shows up in anxiety, in fatigue, in chronic stress, and even in physical illness. Your body remembers what your mind tries to suppress. You must begin to ask yourself what your guilt is really protecting. Is it protecting others from discomfort, or is it protecting you from rejection? Is your silence a sign of peace, or a symptom of fear? Because the more you silence yourself to avoid conflict, the more you invite the kind of relationships that require you to disappear. And when disappearing into silence becomes the only way you know to protect yourself from emotional harm, your actions are no longer rooted in genuine kindness, but rather in a deeply ingrained pattern of psychological survival shaped by fear, not choice. There is a quiet line that many people cross without even noticing it. It begins when kindness, once a conscious choice, becomes an obligation. When being nice no longer feels like something you want to offer, but something you must perform in order to be accepted, to be tolerated, or simply to avoid confrontation. In that moment, niceness stops being a reflection of who you are and becomes a mask worn to conceal who you are afraid to be. This mask is not made of dishonesty, it is made of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being disliked, fear of being alone. And beneath that fear, there is something more painful. The belief that if people truly knew your thoughts, your frustrations, or your discomforts, they would leave you, so you hide them. You repress the parts of yourself that feel inconvenient, angry, or dissatisfied, and you cover them with patience, softness, and smiles. In the language of psychotherapy, this is known as repression, the unconscious defense mechanism that keeps unacceptable feelings or thoughts out of conscious awareness. Over time, repression does not make those emotions disappear. It forces them inward, where they begin to shape your inner world. Anxiety grows, resentment simmers, your voice weakens, and still, you try harder to be liked, to be needed, to be seen as kind. But repression comes with a cost. It distorts your sense of self. You begin to confuse your performance of niceness with your identity. You believe you are a kind person because you never raise your voice, never complain, never make demands. Yet inside you feel exhausted, taken for granted, and emotionally isolated. This is not compassion. It is a slow self-erasure in the name of peace. Sigmund Freud once argued that what is repressed always returns, not directly, but in disguised forms. It returns as tension in the body, as irritability in your voice, as fatigue that no amount of rest can heal. Your body becomes the outlet for truths you do not speak. Your nervous system carries the weight of everything you have chosen not to express. This process is often mistaken for maturity. People say you are strong, patient, selfless, but strength without boundaries is not resilience. It is neglect, and patience, when rooted in fear, is not a virtue. It is submission, masked as virtue. The more you repress, the more distant you become from your own needs, your own truth, and eventually, from your own sense of worth. In therapeutic practice, individuals who struggle with this pattern often report an inability to say what they feel in real time. They only recognize their emotional state hours later, or after they have been pushed too far. This delay is not a flaw in emotional intelligence. It is the result of chronic self-censorship, practiced over years, until the body and mind no longer trust each other fully. You may notice this in your own life. You say yes before thinking. You feel guilty for needing space. You tolerate behavior that others would immediately confront. And when someone praises your kindness, you feel conflicted because you know how much that kindness has cost you. This conflict is not something to ignore. It is a sign that your niceness has become a role you are expected to play, not a truth you are free to express. And roles, when internalized too deeply, become prisons. You must begin to ask yourself whether your kindness is rooted in love, or if it is a mask you wear to avoid rejection. Whether your smile is an act of presence, or a defense against being seen. Because when the performance of being nice becomes your strategy for emotional survival, it is no longer an expression of who you are, but a mirror of what you fear. Every interaction, whether spoken or silent, carries more meaning than you may realize. When you meet someone new, when you respond to a request, when you give in during an argument, you are not just exchanging words or gestures. You are communicating something deeper, something your nervous system may not consciously register, but something the other person is likely absorbing. You are showing them how far you can be pushed, how you handle pressure, and whether or not you enforce your emotional boundaries. From the perspective of behavioral psychology, human beings are constantly evaluating one another. This evaluation is subtle, unconscious, and often automatic. Within the first few moments of contact, people are sizing you up, not based on your intentions, but based on your behavioral patterns. They notice if you hesitate to speak, if you avoid eye contact, if you prioritize their comfort over your own. These are not meaningless signals, they are cues, and for individuals with a manipulative mindset, they are data points. This process is not always malicious. It is simply part of how social hierarchies have been formed since the beginning of civilization. In any social group, there are those who lead, those who follow, and those who observe quietly, looking for leverage. The more consistently you demonstrate a pattern of compliance, emotional accommodation, or passive agreement, the more likely it is that you will be labeled, not in words, but in expectations. You become the one who will not resist, the one who can be asked for more, the one who will not say no. In research focused on social learning and dominance behavior, participants were often tested in group decision-making scenarios. Those who were quick to agree, reluctant to question, or hesitant to assert personal opinions were more likely to be ignored in future discussions. They were viewed as contributors, but not leaders, as kind, but not powerful, as cooperative, but not essential. These labels were not official, but they shaped every future interaction. This is the hidden reality behind being nice. You are being watched, not for your goodness, but for your patterns. You are being measured in silence, not with words, but with the way others respond to your presence. When you say yes without enthusiasm, when you comfort those who hurt you, when you allow small transgressions to go unchallenged, you are giving more than kindness. You are giving a psychological signal. I will absorb this, and I will not push back. For those with a balanced mind, this signal may be met with appreciation, but for those shaped by emotional manipulation, it becomes an invitation. They begin to test, they ask for more, they challenge your discomfort, they push your limits gently at first, then more directly, and each time you comply, you confirm what they suspected. You are manageable. You may wonder how these patterns were learned in the first place. Often they begin early in life, in environments where love was conditional, where disagreement was punished, or where survival depended on emotional obedience. You became skilled at pleasing others, not because it brought joy, but because it reduced conflict. Now as an adult, that same pattern leaves you exposed, not to punishment, but to invisible power games that you never agreed to play. What makes this even more complex is the way you justify it. You tell yourself that you are being polite, respectful, understanding, and on the surface that may be true, but deep within, your emotional system knows something is off. You feel the drain, You notice the lack of reciprocity. You sense, even if you cannot explain it, that you are being pulled into something that does not feel right. This awareness is not a weakness. It is the first step to reclaiming your sense of self. But it requires you to stop asking how to be liked and start asking whether your kindness is being returned with dignity. You cannot control how others measure you, but you can control the signals you send. If this resonates with something buried inside you, write it down, not to prove anything, not to perform, but to confront what has been hidden. In the comments, share a time when your kindness was mistaken for compliance. Let that story begin a shift, not just for you, but for someone else who has stayed silent for too long. Because what happens next is not about being nice. It is about being conscious of the cost. Reclaiming your strength does not mean abandoning your kindness. It means understanding that kindness, without clarity, becomes a magnet for those who do not know how to respect it. The solution is not to become harsh, bitter, or cold. The solution is to become aware, to develop the emotional intelligence, to know when your giving is genuine and when it is quietly demanded, when your softness is honored and when it is exploited. In psychological terms, this process is known as boundary formation. Boundaries are not walls that shut others out. They are filters that protect what is sacred. They allow you to remain open-hearted without becoming unguarded. They define what is acceptable, what is mutual, and what is no longer tolerable. Without boundaries, your identity is left vulnerable, shaped by the moods, demands, and needs of those around you. With boundaries, you remain kind, but you no longer feel responsible for regulating the emotions of everyone else. To build boundaries, you must first identify the difference between discomfort and danger. Saying no may feel uncomfortable. Asking for space may trigger anxiety. But those moments are not signs of harm. They are signs of growth. Psychological resilience begins when you stop avoiding discomfort and begin using it as information. What are you afraid of when you assert yourself? What story plays in your mind when you disappoint someone? Whose voice do you hear when you begin to doubt your right to have limits? Therapists often describe healing as a process of reparenting the self. You learn to speak to yourself with the care you never received. You learn to give permission to your own needs. You stop waiting for approval and begin creating your own safety. This is not about dominance. It is about emotional restoration, about repairing the quiet damage caused by years of self-neglect. Kindness, when it comes from a grounded place, is powerful. It creates trust, fosters connection, and builds community. But kindness without strength is fragile. It can be manipulated, it can be dismissed, and eventually it collapses under the weight of unmet expectations and silent resentment. To protect your humanity, you must learn the language of assertiveness. This is not aggression, it is calm confidence. It is the ability to say no without apology, to express needs without guilt, to walk away from disrespect without explanation. Assertiveness does not reject compassion, it enhances it. Because when you are clear about your boundaries, your kindness becomes sustainable. It comes from abundance, not obligation. The greatest shift happens when you stop seeing yourself as someone who must earn space through behavior. You begin to recognize that your presence, your thoughts, and your feelings are valid, regardless of whether others affirm them. You move from being a caretaker of other people's emotions to being a guardian of your own. This does not happen overnight. It requires consistent attention, repeated reflection, and at times painful honesty. You will face resistance. Some will accuse you of changing, some will withdraw, some will challenge your new stance. But these reactions are not your responsibility. They are simply signs that the dynamics are no longer unbalanced in their favor. Your goal is not to become invulnerable. It is to become conscious, to give when it is real, to help when it does not harm you, to love without losing yourself, and to finally understand that being nice is not the same as being free. As you begin this shift, keep a journal. Write down moments when you feel unseen, when you say yes too quickly, when you feel resentment creeping in. These moments are the trail markers of change. They will guide you, not away from kindness, but toward a version of it that does not require your silence. And in that version, you are no longer a target. You are a human being, with depth, with needs, and with the right to protect them. To explore the relationship between kindness and power, you must look beyond surface behavior and into the architecture of the human psyche. Power is not always loud or violent. In many cases, it is subtle, silent, and invisible. It shapes how people move through the world, how they are treated, and how they treat others. And when kindness is disconnected from power, it begins to decay. It no longer uplifts. It begins to drain. There is a shadow within every person, a psychological space described in depth by Carl Gustav Jung. This shadow is not evil by nature. It contains the instincts, the impulses, and the forgotten truths that you have been taught to suppress. It includes your anger, your fear, your desire for respect, and your longing for autonomy. Most people try to bury their shadow in the name of being good, but what they bury does not disappear. It waits, feeding silently on every moment when your voice is silenced, when your space is invaded, and when your kindness is taken for granted. When you deny your shadow, your kindness becomes a coping strategy, not a virtue. You smile to avoid tension. You agree to avoid rejection. You forgive, not because you are free, but because you are afraid. And those who learn to recognize this pattern do not always respond with care. Some respond with control. They see that you will fold under pressure. They see that you will yield to guilt, and they begin to use your own denial against you. True power does not reject kindness. It gives it weight. It roots compassion in self-respect. It allows you to be soft when you choose, and firm when you must. It helps you hold the complexity of being human without needing to be perfect or constantly pleasing. And when you integrate your shadow, when you acknowledge that part of you that wants to be heard, that needs to feel safe, and that refuses to disappear, you become whole. This wholeness does not look like what society often portrays as success. It is quiet, it is strong, it is uncomfortable at times, because it requires that you unlearn the patterns that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. It requires that you sit with the guilt of saying no, the fear of being misunderstood, and the silence that follows when you stop apologizing for existing. Philosophy has long questioned the nature of goodness. Friedrich Nietzsche warned against the passive morality that encourages obedience without strength. He spoke of the danger of self-sacrifice that is not grounded in purpose. In psychological terms, this mirrors the experience of those who give endlessly, not out of love, but out of fear that their value depends on their usefulness. You cannot remain in this position forever. At some point, your mind and body will demand change. The resentment will grow louder. The fatigue will become unmanageable. The disconnection from your true self will feel like suffocation. And in that moment, you will have a choice: to keep performing the role of the nice person, or to begin the difficult process of reclaiming your power without discarding your compassion. This is not a decision that happens all at once. It is a slow unfolding, a daily practice of checking in with your motives, your limits, and your emotional truth. It is choosing to be kind from a place of integrity, not from fear of conflict. It is allowing yourself to disappoint others, rather than abandon yourself again. Because power without kindness becomes cruelty, but kindness without power becomes invisibility. And you were not born to disappear behind a smile. If you have stayed with this message until now, then something within you already knows that this path you have walked, this habit of being nice at the cost of your peace, cannot continue unchanged. You may not have the words for it, but you have felt it in the weight of unspoken thoughts, in the ache that follows one-sided giving, in the quiet moments where you wonder whether anyone truly sees you beyond your usefulness. This is not the end of your kindness. It is the beginning of your awakening. You are not being asked to stop caring. You are being invited to stop disappearing. You are not being asked to close your heart. You are being reminded to open your eyes. And perhaps for the first time, you are starting to feel the difference between giving with love and giving under pressure, between warmth that flows from self-respect and silence that comes from fear. You have seen now that being nice, without awareness, can be interpreted as an offer to be used, an offer to be dismissed, an offer to be measured, not by your value but by your willingness to absorb discomfort. You have seen how dark psychology thrives, not in violence but in quiet imbalance, how it watches, listens, waits for signs that you will not fight back, and how it begins to shape the rules of your relationships while you are still trying to keep the peace. But peace cannot exist where you are not allowed to be whole, where you are required to shrink, where your kindness is expected but never returned. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to build walls. You only need to remember that your kindness is a choice, not a contract. And when that choice comes from a place of strength, it becomes something rare, something unbreakable, something that no manipulator can own, because it is no longer being traded for belonging. There will be people who will not like this change. They will call it selfish. They will say, you are cold, distant, different. That is because they were benefiting from your silence. Do not let their discomfort become your compass. Let your inner truth guide you now. Not guilt, not obligation, but truth. If something in this message felt familiar, do not rush past it. Let it sit with you for a while. You do not need to respond right away. Just notice what it brought up. Maybe you remember a moment that felt too small to matter at the time, but now feels different. Maybe you see a pattern you have always explained away. This kind of reflection does not need to be loud. It just needs to be honest. And if you ever feel like putting it into words, you will find others who have felt the same. Sometimes just hearing that said out loud is enough to shift something. We will continue to explore the parts of human behavior that most people avoid, the uncomfortable truths, the hidden patterns, and the forces that shape us without our awareness. Not every answer needs to arrive today. Some realizations take time, some need space, and some only come when you are no longer trying to avoid them. And when that moment comes, you will not need permission to question what you once accepted, or to change the way you allow yourself to be treated.